Today we're going to be learning how to transfer a mural to a wall or a canvas using the Doodle Grid method, also known as Lazy Grid or Scribble Grid. We're going to start with some random doodles on the wall, then we're going to see how it works using Photoshop for a more graphic explanation, and then we're moving to the wall. First we're going to place the sketch on the wall using the doodles, and then we're going to render it while we see the pros and cons of this super powerful method. Stay with me if you want to learn everything about it. This is Doodle Grid from ARTISTHUB.STUDIO. First of all, we're going to buff our wall. I usually go with a color that is a midtone of my main piece. Once it dries out, we have to make some doodles on the wall, some scribbles, whatever you want. I like to go with my ABCs because I have a lot of reference in that way. The only thing that I have to do later is to find one of those letters or numbers or maybe some signs. I really like to cover my wall with stuff because it's going to be way easier for me to find my design in the wall. This moment could be annoying because a lot of people will think you are just graffitiing on a wall and then they think you're vandalizing a wall. So be careful and try to explain to them if they ask, and be patient. Once you have the whole wall covered in doodles, you need to find a super straight picture, meaning you have to avoid all the distortion that perspective will give you. Try to find a super straight picture. All the edges of the wall have to be straight. This is exactly the picture that I'm looking for. A very straight one, very forward. That's it. And of course, you need to be super close. The closest you get, the more definition your doodles will be. I'm gonna do it in Photoshop, but you can do it in whatever app you like to use. Photoshop will give me a lot of control on my image. And maybe you can do it with other apps, but for me this really works and I highly recommend doing it this way. Here I'm looking for these 90-degree angles. I'm gonna show you with rulers here in Photoshop. As you can see, my picture is almost perfect. Since I'm already here, I'm gonna stretch it a little bit until I find perfect 90-degree angles, and I'm going to do it like that with the free transform tool in Photoshop. It's really important to have a straight picture, otherwise you will have the risk of making a kind of weird mural. We are artists and we need to see the stuff. So what I'm going to do next, I'm gonna be using the lasso tool in Photoshop, and I'm gonna split my image in two. I will separate my doodle grid from my total picture. So in that way, I'm gonna be able to work a little bit on my doodle without affecting the rest of the picture, and that's very useful for us. I have three layers here. One is my design, one is my picture, and the other one is my doodle grid. So I can place my mural exactly where it's supposed to be, and I'm not going to be overlapping the rest of the image. And like that, I'm gonna be able to see exactly how it's going to look at the end. Basically, this is my image, and the doodle grid will give you the opportunity to perfectly frame your image. It would be really hard to do it with freehand text grid or maybe cover grid to frame it like that, because I know that I'm gonna give it this very thin edge of white paint in the sides, you know, in the top and the bottom, and that's really hard to strike with other techniques. This is almost like using a projector. So what I have done here in my wall, I use a midtone for the buff paint. That's the color that I'm going to be using as a midtone for my mural. And then my doodles are made with a little darker color, maybe 1 or 2 points in value. So like that, I don't have that much contrast on my wall, and it's going to be easier for me to cover. And because of that, I will have to work that image a little bit here in Photoshop. I will have to increase that contrast in order to make it pop. And like that, it's going to be easier for me to see my image through it with the transparency. And so in that way, it's gonna be way easier for me to clean it afterwards on the wall. So to crank that contrast, what I have to do is to increase the brightness of the whole thing. I need my buff paint to look almost white. Now it makes sense why I had to divide the picture in two, because I'm gonna work only on the doodles and I don't want the rest of the picture to be modified by my settings. Once my brightness is done, I will go with the levels, and the levels basically what it's going to do is to divide my wall in the high tones, mid tones and low tones. And since my background is already very bright, when I move my mid tones, I'm only going to be applying it to my doodles, and I need those doodles to pop. I need them to be darker. So I play around until I get pretty much what I need. And now for the sake of my head, I'm gonna decrease the saturation. I'm gonna put it in black and white, so it's going to be no saturation in this image. As you can see, if you go back and forth and you see from the previous image to the worked image, these doodles are much more visible now. Okay, now what we're going to do is first, I'm gonna save this image because I need my diffuse image, an image with no doodles. 2, I'm gonna play around with the opacity. I'm gonna lower the opacity maybe to 40%, 50%, and then I will save that image, and then I will do it again with a maybe 70% opacity. And I'm gonna take to the mural few images because some of them will show me stuff that I don't see in the other ones. So keep in mind that you will have to do this because sometimes the reference have like too much contrast, and if you wanna see the dark part of the reference, you may need more transparency. I'm going to do exactly what I'm going to do on the wall. This is going to be more graphic for you to see because you don't have my stupid body on top of the image covering everything. So basically what I have to do is to transfer this image to this wall using the Doodle Grids. This is what I'm going to see on my phone. So I know this 1, 2, 3, it is what I need, so I have to find it on the wall. And then we'll have to place some marks as we did with the traditional grid that I showed you before with the grid. And pretty much like that, I will have to link all these marks together until I have my line, my structure line. And then I have a little curve here coming from the sea. Almost straight line, I have this point in here that I'm gonna break my nail in this little angle. And that's my nail. A little bit higher in this curved line in here, I will have the top of my nail, and it goes down almost parallel to the 1. Following the C line, I have this mark in here, and breaking that 1 in the half, I will connect these lines. And like that, we found the rest of our thumb. Now I see that this straight line will end up here in the middle of my O, and I have to reach the top of this curve in here. Here you can see I don't have that much information on the wall, but I can calculate with the 8 and the curve where it's supposed to be. That's why I like to create the most marks possible. Okay, and now I'm gonna speed up the process because you already saw what we were doing, and it's important for you to see a little bit more of this work. I don't wanna bore you, but it's pretty much the same thing all over. We're finding a little problem with our reference here. I need to work on my index finger, and since I'm working with this multiply image, all the blacks are very black and I don't really see where everything's supposed to be. That's why I have the other reference images. This part of the mural is going to be made following a transparency picture. It's going to be easier for me to see where everything belongs. And as you can see here in my transparency picture, it's very easy to see. That's why you would go back and forth from different images until you get exactly what you need. Okay, now we're moving to the wall. I'm gonna start in the same area because I like that thumb, and the 1, 2, 3 was very easy for me to find. So I'm going to start there. You already know my reference, so you know where everything is. Somehow working with the spray can is faster than doing it on Photoshop. Find some marks. You don't have to do everything at once. You can find marks and then you can connect them. It's always useful to find different marks and then connect them, because sometimes you will find yourself floating in the area that you don't really know what you're doing. So if you find a fixed mark, it's always much better. I'm gonna speed up the process a little bit because you already saw this way too many times and you wanna see the rendering, but basically what we're doing here is finding the same thing all over again. The Doodle Grid, we go straight up with the detail layer. We don't do much structure. It's pretty much finding all the shapes that you want, and like that we have to find some shading too. Here when we are doodling it, it's alright if you want to find some muscles, some shades, some shadows, because you have a lot of information going on and sometimes those doodles will be like a distraction. So it's alright to render it a little bit on the go. Since I'm placing my image with maybe it is a 0.7 in value, it's a little darker than my doodles, but it's far from black. I know this will work as probably a layer number 3. I may go with 2 darker colors on top of this one. So it's alright if I go crazy with my shadows, because then I will have the opportunity to crank those shadows with a darker color. The beginning is about to find all those main shapes, all the main part of the mural, but since we have to move around a lot, I find it useful to render it a little bit so you don't waste all your energy going back and forth. And of course, it's always nice to find the piece at the start. Remember, you have to find some marks and then you have to link those marks with the bigger shapes, and then experience will tell you where you have to start. Because sometimes you have like a dead spot, you don't know where it goes, you don't know where it belongs. It could be hard for you to start from a random point, so it's always nice to find a fixed point, like a thumb, like a finger, like a nail, something that you can grow the mural from. And as you can see, I'm already like rendering a lot in here. I'm trying to find all the shades. This kind of method really works for when you're working in the street, or maybe you're working in a festival, or you're working with your crew and you have a lot of audience there, people walking around, and they will see a little art going on, so they don't freak out that much with all those doodles, with all those marks on the wall. They don't think you're a vandal doing crazy stuff on the wall. As you can see, this is a very powerful tool. It takes a lot of material though. To cover all those doodles will take a lot of paint, but it's totally worth it because you're saving a lot in time. Of course, my choice would be always to use a cover grid. It's a method that I show you previous to this one. But this one is actually very useful for a lot of things, and it's really fun because you start to work for starters, and it feels artsy because you are drawing in a minute. Depending on the problem you have to solve, you will choose a method. Don't get married with one of the methods. You should learn all of them, and depending on what you want to do, and depending on what you need, depending on the problem you have to solve, you will choose one or the other. And of course, remember, if you want to learn how to paint one of these from scratch, if you want to learn how to render a mural like this, check out my website, which is ARTISTHUB.STUDIO, and I have tons of courses in there. I'm going to teach you how to paint graffiti, murals, portraits, hyperrealism, graffiti, anamorphic, photography, digital art, everything. So go there and check it out. You won't regret it because it's very powerful, and it's basically what I wanted to have when I was growing and when I was learning. It's 25 years of experience dumped in there for you guys. And that's basically the blocking of the mural. I already placed everything where it's supposed to be, and as you can see, the framing is absolutely crazy perfect. Everything is in the place it's supposed to be. All the dimensions are all right. We don't have any searching lines, we don't have any structural lines, and the framing is perfect. Now what I have to do is to clean a little bit that background, and like that is going to help me to see the mural in a better way. Of course, it's always better for you to work with the brightest part already there. I'm going to be painting a white background, and also because I don't need to find anything else in that background. It's going to be a solid color, and when you paint the background, it's going to be easier for you to see the rendering process. Doodle Grid is probably the most popular method nowadays because it is easy, it's super strong, and it really works. And we don't really need extra tools. You will bring your phone anyway, and then you will do everything through your phone. You're gonna take the picture, you're gonna use the Doodle Grids, and then you're gonna see the reference in your phone. And of course, if you have the opportunity to make it with the laptop, it would be much better because you have much more control with a stronger software like Photoshop or any other. You can get away just with your phone and you will have pretty much the same result. Doodle Grid is very popular because you start with the spray can at the beginning. You don't have to measure anything and you just go there on the wall and then you start painting something, and that feels very artsy and of course it's really fun. One of the advantages of this method is that we start from the very beginning with the spray paint, painting on the wall. That makes it super fun and artsy. It feels artsy because you are already drawing and we don't need to measure anything, and that's something to think about. It's very handy. To recap, the Doodle Grid is about to make all sorts of random doodles or marks on the wall, and then you take a picture of that, and then you're gonna import it into whatever app you like, and then you will trace the mural using those doodles as a grid. Super simple and straightforward, but super powerful too. I think it is really important to keep in mind that the more information you have on the wall, the easier it will be to transfer the reference, but it's going to be harder for you to cover the marks. Like everything is about to find that sweet spot that works for you. The pros. Number 1, we start painting immediately and that makes it super fun. Number 2, we don't need a lot of tools, just your phone will do it. Number 3, it's a great method to find the framing on the wall. Since we're doing it in a digital medium, we have total control on that. Number 4, painting the render on top of this and leaving some transparency, you could see a little bit through it, and that doodle could work as a texture if you need something hyper realistic. Number 5, it requires the artist's interpretation, so you kind of see the imperfection of the humanly made, and that's very pleasing for the eye. Now the cons. Number 1, material cost is elevated since we have to make all the doodles and then we have to cover all of them with spray paint. You could be using like a lot of paint. If you usually go full cans, full spray paint, you're gonna be alright because it's pretty much the same. But if you like to block the colors using bucket paint, it's going to be way more expensive to cover all those doodles with spray paint. Number 2, it is tricky for big walls. Since you need a straight picture, you may need a drone for elevated walls, and that's inconvenient. Number 3. It is really hard to cover all the doodles. If you see them once the rendering layer are all done, that's wrong. And it could be time consuming to cover them all. That's what I said before. If you use them in a smart way and if you use the doodles as textures, it's alright. But if you have like numbers or signs or stuff, you have to make them disappear totally. Number 4. Once the main structure is placed, the remaining doodles could be annoying for our rendering. Number 5. We need a fully charged phone and some app to make the transparency. And number 6, people freaks out when they see it because it looks like you are vandalizing a wall and then you have to explain. So be careful with what you doodling and be patient with elderly people, please. It looks like we have a lot of cons in here, and it's true, but it's totally worth it since I believe this is the fastest of all the methods. It's very, very useful for smaller walls and crazy useful for anamorphic murals. I would recommend it for 1 or 2 stories. Bigger than that, you will have a risk of losing your perspective and it could end up in a bad mural. I have seen it in huge buildings and the artists apply it well, but you need a little experience on that. Once you understand this method, it's really hard to go back to others because it's way easier, and that's why this is one of the favorites nowadays. Young artists will use this 100%. I hope you really like this method and you learned something out of this video. There are 5 more very powerful ways to transfer a mural to a wall or a canvas, depending on the problem you have to solve. And be sure to check out the studio website, which is ARTISTHUB.STUDIO, and please like the video and subscribe to the channel. That really helps. See you in the next wall.